morning, you're watching Businessworld Live. I'm Danie, Laurel.
And I'm Delos Santos. Here are the biggest stories to kickstart this trading day, Tuesday. Citing the urgent need to address an anticipated food crisis, President-elect Bongbong Marcos appoints himself as the next head of the Agriculture Department.
As to agriculture, I think that the problem is severe enough that I have decided to take on the portfolio of Secretary of Agriculture, at least for now.
Another round of oil price hikes takes effect today. Pump prices have increased by up to 41 pesos a liter since the start of the year.
With the peso tumbling further to 54 against the dollar, incoming Bangko Sentral Governor Felipe Medalla says the focus of the incoming Marcos administration is to manage inflation and not the exchange rate.
And the Trade Department expects more than 500 billion pesos worth of investment pledges in the next 18 months. We begin our broadcast with President-elect Bongbong Marcos naming himself as the next agriculture chief.
But Marcos Jr. clarifies that his appointment will just be in a temporary capacity.
As to agriculture, I think that the problem is severe enough that I have decided to take on the portfolio of Secretary of Agriculture, at least for now, and at least until we can reorganize the Department of Agriculture in the way that it will make it ready for the next years to come.
Now, outgoing DA Secretary William Dar welcomed Marcos's decision, saying having the incoming president lead the Agriculture Department will ensure that the sector will finally be prioritized.
From my point of view, maganda naman yung ganun na sitwasyon para once and for all, may tama na yung right priorities sa agrikultura.
Now, in taking over the Department of Agriculture, President-elect Bongbong Marcos has vowed to tackle the looming food crisis head-on. Marlene Alcaide with the rest of the story.
Increasing rice production. This is one of the things President-elect Ferdinand Marcos Jr. will be focusing on once he is finally seated as the Agriculture Secretary. He has decided to hold the post in the meantime to ensure that the looming food crisis in the country will be addressed.
We're going back to basics and trying, and we will rebuild the value chain of agriculture. And that is why I thought it's important that the President take that portfolio.
He sees food prices rising even more in the coming months due to various global events, including the Russian invasion of Ukraine.
In response to the events in Ukraine, which have affected the Philippines' agriculture and including the food supply in a very serious way. We are forecasting that there will be an increase in food prices in the next quarters that will come, simply because of the outside forces.
He says the government must respond promptly to a food crisis issue.
We have to be able to be agile. We have to be able to respond properly in a measured way as soon as there is a situation that needs to be addressed.
He also notes that the Agriculture Department must be restructured.
Marami tayong mga kailangang palitan. Marami tayong mga medyo naging mga iba't ibang opisina na hindi na masyadong nagagamit o kailangan nang i-retool para sa post-pandemic. Dahil nga iba na yung ating ginagawa ngayon.
Meanwhile, Agri-Group Samahan ng Industriya ng Agrikultura or SINAG lauded Marcos Jr.'s move. For now, they say only the president has the power to fix what previous agriculture officials broke. But another group, Kilusang Magbubukid ng Pilipinas or KMP, disagrees with Marcos Jr. They ask how can the president-elect fix problems in agriculture when he's inexperienced in the sector. For News 5, Marlene Alcaide, we are One News.
Now, how does that appointment sit with the incumbent officials of the Agriculture Department? To answer that, we have on the show DA Undersecretary Fermin Adriano. Usec Adriano, thank you for joining us. Good morning.
Good morning, Jess and Daniel. Good
All right,
morning.
your thoughts first. I mean, you have Marcos, despite having no previous experience in the agriculture sector, appointing himself as the incoming, at least in an interim period, as the incoming agriculture secretary. What does that bring to the table?
I think we particularly welcome that because, as our current secretary said, that hopefully if the president is at the helm of the department, the sector will be given the proper investment. And we look at the data for 20 years, and we found out that there's so much underinvestment by the government on the agricultural sector. The average investment, using reference as the GAA, is around 1% of our GAA goes to agriculture compared to other countries like 4 to 6%, Thailand and Vietnam. So there is a persistent underinvestment in agriculture. And if you look further on the data, most of that budget really goes to supporting rice productivity enhancement program, meaning there is nothing left for the development of other commodities like corn, livestock, poultry, etc., vegetables, etc., which are also badly needed if we are to maintain a high level of nutrition among our people. So that's the sad story of agriculture in the country. And that's the reason why we welcome it, because once the president says that, okay, to Congress or to our economic managers that you have to put more money to agriculture, then we would not have a lot of objections or oppositions, which we experience under this current administration.
But other than budgetary constraints here, he did mention as well that, there's a restructuring, a retooling needed in the agency. What do you think are these segments, at least of the DA, that needs restructuring at this stage?
If you look at it, we have tons of studies analyzing the problems of the agricultural sector. We are never short of studies from the World Bank, ADB to PIDS, etc., etc. The problem is really in the execution, and that's where we lag behind our neighboring countries. The operationalization of all those plans, concepts, and ideas. And that's the reason why, besides the fact that we need to restructure some of the units in the department, I think we should add the fact that we have to increase the human capacity of the people in the Department of Agriculture. As the current secretary has been saying, we need to professionalize the ranks. The problem actually springs from the fact that since government positions, particularly the senior ones, now offer a more attractive compensation, there are a lot of people who want to come into the government despite the fact that they're not qualified for the jobs. And they normally get it because of political loyalties to certain politicians who become their sponsors and to become officials of the government. That's the sad reality. I'll give you an example. For example, regional offices of the Department of Agriculture handles about 1.8 billion, depending on the size of the region, to almost 4 billion a year annually. If you're in the private sector and you have a branch having that amount of money, you will put the best managers to handle 1.8 billion to 4 billion annually. Unfortunately, we cannot do that here because a lot of some of the appointees are, the proteges of some politicians, and they're put in the position even if they're not qualified to handle the jobs. That's just the hard reality.
Sir, incoming President-elect Marcos did mention this would probably be only a temporary solution, okay? But also the Department of Agriculture said a lot of the issues that Marcos will be inheriting are things outside of the country's control. You've got fuel prices, fertilizer prices as well, and the fact that we need to lower the import tariffs is also because of these issues na nagmamahal na yung just to produce. What can be done in the short term by the President-elect to target issues that might not even be under our control?
Well, we have to look for what we call in economics as value for money. Where do you put your scarce resources so that you can obtain the maximum benefit? At this present juncture, where we have a crisis, it has to be a combination of two things. We should allow, importation of certain products because there's shortage of supply because of the lingering effect of the COVID-19 pandemic, which has affected the logistics of transporting food. That's one thing. So we need to be able to balance importation and local production. And as I said, focus on increasing productivity of the sector. That is a must. It is imperative that we increase the productivity, because if you look at the data for a 20-year, 22-year period, which we have tracked, the productivity is very low, about 1.2% or something like that, which is easily surpassed by our population growth rate of 1.4. So, and that's the main reason why we keep on importing, because our population growth rate just surpasses our agricultural productivity growth rate, because you have to remember that we're adding 2 million babies a year. So how can agriculture cope up with that, with the usual budget that is given every year?
Okay, so more
So
budget.
we need to think about closely on how to improve productivity.
Sir, related question lang po, no? What about circumventing the effects of climate change? And with all of these issues that the sector has been hounded for, what can be done in the immediate term to counter these effects, or to at least be more preventive?
Climate change is so important because our calculation shows that we are losing about 20 to 25 billion pesos worth of goods due to damages and losses as an adverse effect of climate change. And therefore, we need to do some mitigation measures. We actually started doing that by encouraging early planting season for our rice farmers. That means you plant now before the destructive typhoons happen sometime in October, November, December. That's usually destructive. So we did it last year, and that's the reason why we have a relatively, it's a really an impressive growth rate, almost 20 million metric tons of palay, which is the highest for several years, more than 5 years.
Okay.
So those are the things that we can adapt. Early planting season. Secondly, the use of inorganic fertilizer. We have talked to the UP Los Baños using the so-called bio-N. It's a nitrogen-fixing kind of thing. We need to massively apply that kind of technology, and that's the reason why increasing productivity needs infusion of technology now, including smart agriculture.
Okay. Now, one major hurdle, of course, for the incoming administration, inflationary pressure. I mean, Marcos himself said that he expects food prices to rise even further in the near term. So far this year, as it is, which products are experiencing these increases at least, and what's been causing this, and how long do you expect the trend to continue?
Yes, unfortunately, it will keep on increasing across the board. If you look at it, rice, the inflation rate is negative before, but you will feel that an increase, a notch, rice inflation by this coming 6 months. The main reason is the increase in production costs. We have calculated that through the Philippine Rice Research Institute. The increase is about average of 3.13 pesos per kilogram of rice. So tumaas na talaga. So, and if you look at across the board, for example, pork, that has been affected by ASF, about 25% of our hog population was decimated. So because of the shortness intersupply, that will increase. In terms of poultry, because of the increase in the feeds, because if you look at the cost of production of poultry, about 60 to 70% of the cost of production is animal feed, which is basically your corn and feed wheat, which is an inferior wheat. And since our local corn production only can meet about at most 60%, we need to import about 3 million metric tons of feed wheat, which is difficult now because of the Russia-Ukraine conflict, because a lot of wheat, about almost 28% of the wheat in the world market is produced by these two countries. So there's very tight supply of feed wheat, and therefore very tight supply of animal feed. And that is the one causing an increase in your poultry products, and you will notice that they're also becoming smaller because of the lack of feeds. And your pork, because 50 to 60% of the production cost of pork is animal feeds. And in terms of aquaculture, your fish, about almost 70 to 75% of your production cost is again feed. So that is driving up the cost of all these products, basic food products. And of course, plus the factor that fertilizer is an important input to planting, particularly rice, which has actually tripled in terms of price. So those are the things that driving, including your vegetables. So that is a real, as I said, I was saying is that if 2020-21 is the crisis, is the COVID crisis, I think we're looking at 20 to 23 as the food crisis years. So that's the reason why we welcome the president himself taking over, because this is the next crisis that we're facing, and it holds the potential of unraveling into a social unrest. Because if there are food shortages, people will just get mad.
Okay, now of course, when we're talking about Marcos Jr. sitting as the next agriculture secretary, you have to bring up the point, a campaign promise, of course, of Marcos to bring down the price of rice to 20 pesos a kilo. But you mentioned earlier, we should expect at least an increase, an average increase of 3 pesos and 13 centavos per kilogram. So how achievable is that 20 peso mark here?
It will take time before you can achieve that. And it will take so much money from the government to be able to achieve that through subsidy. And we already did our calculation. If you want to maintain it for a year, you need about 245 billion pesos.
Sorry, what's that again?
245.
245 billion. A simple arithmetic, sir. If it's 20, the current, kasi ganito yan eh, the rule of thumb is that if you want a kilo price, there has to be 2 kilos of palay because you have to dry, meal, wholesale transport, wholesale retail margin. So if the price of palay is 19 pesos, which is the NFA support price, that means in the retail market, it will become 38 pesos. So that means the price difference that you have to subsidize is 18 pesos, okay? Per capita consumption of Filipino, average, Philippine Statistics Authority data, is 118 kilograms per person, okay? So you multiply that, 18 subsidy rate, 118 consumption, and then 110 million Filipinos. That adds up to about 245 billion. The budget of the Department of Agriculture, unfortunately, is only this year 85 billion.
Okay. And finally, Usec, before we let you go, just your thoughts on policy measures here. How long can we keep import tarifications low before it would affect our local industry and our local farmers? But, you know, we need to keep the prices also lower and competitive. And how much more can we afford in terms of subsidies for these farmers and even fishermen?
I think there's no question that we need to subsidize we need to do social protection for our vulnerable farmers. Definitely, that's a responsibility of the state or the government. The only problem is that if we are going to protect, protection is okay, but it has to be time-bound. Like, for example, 7 years or 10 years. And then after that, you have to gradually dismantle protection, because if you don't, the chances are those people or industries or producers engaged in that will become lazy. They will not, install efficiency or competitive enhancement measures, which, by the way, is borne out by our history in the manufacturing sector. And even in the agricultural sector, for example, the sugar industry has been protected since the 1960s. It was the apex of success in the 60s. We are major importers. Now look, we are now importing sugar. Because of the long protection, we did not do time-bound, we did not do our homework of making those sectors efficient and competitive. Because it's much easier to raise tariffs rather than doing your work, delivering competitive enhancement measures to the sector. Kasi magtatrabaho ka talaga dyan but you just sign an EO or something in raising tariff. It's a lazy man's job. But
Sir, so how long should subsidies be in place, sir?
I think it should be about, let's have a time bound of 5 years and then let's look at it and gradually lower tariffs. But right now, given the food crisis and everybody in the international market, I just came from the talks in the WTO, World Trade Organization, last week in Geneva. And everybody is talking about the global food insecurity, the threat, the coming crisis. we need to scoop up, we need to stockpile right now because of the crisis. So that means, for example, Vietnam has lowered the tariff for corn, and China is doing the same thing just to be able to stockpile. Malilate na tayo. It's not the time right now because
Okay.
of the crisis situation.
Okay.
We need to respond based on the context. And that's the reason why we need to be, as the President said, versatile and flexible in approaching this issue.
We need to be
Because
Alright.
ahead.
it's a stomach issue
Oo
that
nga
will generate to social unrest if we don't manage it properly.
All right. Well, all eyes on the president-elect and how he will be handling this in the next few months. Thank you so much for that update. That was, of course, Fermin Adriano, Undersecretary for Policy Planning and Research at the Department of
Thank you.
Agriculture. Thank you, sir.
Thank you for the opportunity of explaining things. Thank you. Thank you very much.
Now, another week, another round of oil price hikes. Some fuel companies have announced that they are increasing their gasoline prices by 80 centavos per liter today, while diesel is up by 3 pesos and 10 centavos per liter. The price of kerosene is up by 1 peso and 70 centavos per liter. As of today, per liter prices have gone up by nearly 30 pesos for gasoline and over 41 pesos for diesel and about 35 pesos for kerosene since the start of 2022. Now, here are the other headlines we're keeping our eyes on. Outgoing BSP Governor Ben Jokno is confident that the country would leave by January the list of jurisdictions gray-listed by the Financial Action Task Force, or FATF, over dirty money risks. Last week, the Global Financial Crime Watchdog kept the Philippines on the list, citing the need to further strengthen its action plan to address deficiencies in tackling money laundering. Jokno said the FATF has given the Philippines until January to comply with 18 action plan items identified by the International Cooperation Review Group. Now, the Anti-Money Laundering Council says the country has already complied with 5 action plan items, leaving 13 more to be addressed.
Incoming BSP Governor Felipe Medalla has an explanation as to why the peso dropped to the 54 against the dollar. He says the reason is not because the peso is weakening, but because the dollar has become stronger. Medalla told the chiefs that the dollar is stronger because of high interest rates currently implemented in the United States. He says that the Philippines is not even the country most affected by the strong dollar.
This is a strong dollar problem, not a weak peso problem. If you look at all the currencies, we are just in the middle. Half the countries depreciated more than us, another half have appreciated less than us.
Still, Medalla assures the public that the Marcos economic team is doing a balancing act in managing inflation and the currency. He says all they care about now is managing inflation and not the peso exchange rate.
They kill the economy, imports will drop. So those guys who are saying, oh, we're not raising interest rates enough, we are doing a balancing act. What we care about is Philippine inflation, not the exchange rate.
Pausing for a quick break, but coming right up after that. We'll check how our local bourse is performing this morning after it closed higher on yesterday's trade amid a weakening peso.
More of that and other stories when Business World Live returns. Stay with us.
And you're still watching Business World live here on One News. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie, Laurel.
All right, Dan, as predicted, the peso breached the 54 level yesterday, but equity stayed afloat. Give us more intel.
All right, Jess, as you mentioned, lowest in more than 3 years, our currency led the drop, and most emerging Asian currency. We had heavy trades selling off the peso that was worth more than $1 billion. And you can see that now trading even weaker. We are 54.175. But as, of course, mentioned by our incoming BSP governor, this may be, of course, very much linked to the Fed interest rates and the strength of the dollar over there. But as you mentioned, Jess, just opening our index here, and you can see how we are staying afloat, up by 0.5%. So hopefully a second day in the green. Nevertheless, still well below the 6,400 levels, but still, you know, something promising here. Services up by 0.9% together with properties, a broad-based recovery here. This, however, as of course, we still have a lot of risks on the table. You've got MSCI's Asia Pacific shares hitting the lowest since June 2020. Bitcoin also below $20,000 mark, Jess. So still a lot of things going on for the emerging and more risky assets, so to speak. Let's take a look at our movers here. Converge, MegaWorld, Ayala Land, Globe leading the charge. So a couple of telco companies and a couple of property sectors here. And just around 5 sitting out this rebound. You've got Alliance Global and Emperador in the bottom of the rung. Now, I did want to watch out for the solar stocks. This, as Solar PH has submitted energy contract offers that, if approved by the customers and the regulators, would potentially amount to 9 terawatt hours a year and enable a roster of 10 gigawatts of solar projects to proceed. Now, this is, of course, Razon-led, whereas the other, Levista-led plant over in Nueva Ecija is looking at 500 megawatts. Now, quick look at SPNEC. That's jumping by 2% amid the back of that development. And finally, just a quick peek at pizza. Jess, we've been talking about food prices, a food shortage, but take a look at Shakey's. They're targeting to double their 1,300 potato corner stores in 3 to 4 years, faster than they originally planned. And guess what? They are actually surpassing pre-pandemic sales as of April already. Now, very interestingly, raw material costs have dramatically spiked in the second quarter. And recall, may shortage pa nga ng French fries and other, fast food stores. But they said they anticipated that, and they actually negotiated and bought stocks in advance and locked in the prices way ahead. Very interesting there. So more potato corner, pizza. However, the holding company trading flat right now at 6 pesos and 80 centavos.
Now, in other news, the PLDT Group has blocked over 23 million SMS-based phishing attacks, which is also known as smishing. The PLDT Chief Information Security Officer Angel Redoble said text scams sent through individual numbers are the only ones left unchecked. That's because the telco does not read people's SMS. But the PLDT Group is now in talks with vendors for a possible upgrade to help them detect and prevent text scams coming from individual numbers. They have also coordinated with the PNP Anti-Cybercrime Group to investigate SIM card bulk buying.
Now, Trade Secretary Mon Lopez says the Philippines can expect more than 500 billion pesos worth of investment pledges in the next 18 months. Lopez says these investments are in sectors such as manufacturing PPEs, international sports, and apparel brands. He also mentioned electronics, printers, drones, and battery technology, among others. Lopez added that Elon Musk's SpaceX satellite internet is also included in these investment leads. The outgoing Trade Secretary said that these pledges are driven by recent economic reforms, such as the CREATE Act and amendments to the Public Service Act, the Retail Trade Liberalization Act, and the Foreign Investment Act.
And that's a first look into the business day this Tuesday, June 21, 2022. Join us again tomorrow at exactly 9:30 a.m. You can also catch us on Signal Play. Register for a free account now at www.signalplay.com and stream One News Live anytime, anywhere. I'm Jess De Los Santos.
And I'm Danie Laurel. Mask on, wash hands, stay safe, Philippines. We are One News.